Welcome, everybody, to the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide. We are here for our September edition in Season 4. You know, it's so crazy to me that every time that we come on this season, I want to be able to say Season 4 of the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide, something that we have sort of a passion project for me and the rest of the gang. I'm here today with Nightly News co-president Tyler Coleman. Tyler, your Chiefs, man, they looked fantastic on opening day.
Yeah, they looked really good. I think it's safe to say that Clyde Edwards-Helaire went off a little bit more than expected, which is good to see.
Who was the person on our first podcast who was saying he was a top 5 pick and you all were looking at me like I was crazy?
Well, I was a little surprised because normally the Chiefs don't run the ball that much. So to see him get, I think it was 25 carries, it was really shocking. But
and no catches. That's what really got me. Like, he got all the carries, but they weren't really. They threw the ball his way, but he didn't really get much going out of the backfield. I expect that to change going forward.
I expect it to change, and they might lessen the carries a little bit too, because I think they're going to look to get Hill and, well, Kelsey was involved, but Hill wasn't as much. And hopefully Watkins can keep it going. He had a big first game. So, and
I got to say, it never ceases to amaze me. I always throw you a plug on Twitter. Heels_R_better for the best Braves in-game commentary that you can find on Twitter. You get so fired up about the Braves. It's hilarious.
Well, it's just baseball is my favorite sport. And, I just look, no matter what's going on, COVID, 60-game season, whatever, I want to win. And I'm a competitive person and I want to see the best. So.
I love it. Future general manager of the Braves, Tyler Coleman. Also being joined today by Brian Christiana. Brian, your football team was the worst of all of our football teams on opening day in football, the Cowboys, with frankly, everyone was going off about that call at the end of the game. I thought that was a legitimate push-off. I mean, it was kind of both ways, and for the game to end that way, obviously wasn't helpful, but he did push off. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
I don't even know.
You don't know?
I don't know, because, when he caught it, I was like, that's too good to be true. I think it was good on both. Both parts had a big role in that. One acting job and one extension of the arm. So, that play, you could have just balanced, like it could have been 2 penalties on each guy, and you just redo the play.
I was generally impressed, but honestly,
it's the same team as any other year.
I watched the game, and a very good friend of mine is a Cowboy fan, and I texted him like halfway through the third quarter, like, Dak is terrible. I don't want to say terrible. That's going a bit too far, but he did not look good.
I think that team's just boring. As a fan, I statistically, he didn't have a bad game. He had over 200, no interceptions, no turnovers.
17 points. That's not going to get it done in the NFL.
For fantasy, that's not going to get it done. But, you mean the team in general. Yeah. I thought we were still talking about Dak. No, you also don't go for 4th and 3 from, the 18-yard line or something?
That was odd to me.
Yeah, but this is just Jason Garrett 2.0.
And to Parker, I would honestly say I was a little concerned with how the Steelers looked in the first half, came out in the second half after that big turnover off the 19-play drive, and looked great. Saquon Barkley shut him down. Their defense is the real deal.
The thing is with the Steelers, though, Professor Miller, from last season, the Steelers were always a second-half team, even that showed last season. But their defense, you're right, it showed up Cam Hayward with a pick, T.J. Watt with a pick. Saquon Barkley, I feel, for being a Penn State fan, seeing him struggle because that offensive line in New York is absolutely garbage.
And I got to say, so here's the question, and I think we're going to probably get to this. Was it the Steeler D, or was it the offensive line / Barkley?
I honestly think it was the offensive line because the Steelers' defense was just running through the line. If you notice, if you watch the game, the Steelers were mostly blitzing every single down. They were getting pressure on Jones, but there were some plays that Jones looked good throwing, and they got wide open passes. But let's look at this other statistic. Ben Roethlisberger had more rushing yards than Saquon Barkley.
I was shocked to see that.
9 rushing yards for Ben, and then 6 for Barkley. When I seen that, I was like, "Oh my!" And Barkley's like a number 3 wide receiver. Running back in the league.
Well, I'm not going to. I'd be remiss if I didn't ring the bell for my Washington football team. As I was watching, I watched that entire game except for about 45 minutes when I took a nap in the middle because it was 17-0. I'm like, here's 2020, exactly the same as it's been the last 5 seasons, and then something happened. Their defense, which they've gone number one defense the last 3 years, and Chase Young is the real deal. 2 terrible throws from Carson Wentz for interceptions and a third that should have been picked off. And their offense, economical, but Haskins didn't kill them. And I might be a homer. I'll be the first to admit that I am a homer. I think they've got a shot to at least go 8-8 this year. I think that division is poor. It has been poor for a while. I think the Eagles have just stepped way back. I mean, they just looked pathetic. Now, yes, Miles Sanders not there, but they didn't look good.
They didn't look good, but with all the injuries that they have, they're not going to look good the rest of the season if they don't get healthy.
And Carson Wentz, I just think he's overrated.
I mean, he looked awful.
Literally, week 1, I talked to Jarrett Rivera. I says, let's take a wager of when he's going to get injured because he's injury prone.
You know, this was something I was saying a couple years ago when Foles won the Super Bowl and then they let him go after that. Why not keep Foles and trade Wentz? They could have gotten 2 number 1s for Wentz. Foles is equally as good as Wentz. So they could have paid them the same amount, similar quarterback with 2 number 1 picks. You know, at that time they could have gotten 2 number 1 picks for Wentz. I don't think they could do that at this point, nor would they trade him because they don't have anybody else. So I wonder if the Eagles are going to look back at that decision of letting Foles go as a franchise changer. Anyway, lots to talk about. We've already talked about several things, guys. What are some of the other week 1 takeaways that you had? We'll start with Tyler.
I was impressed by the Arizona Cardinals going into San Francisco and beating the 49ers. You know, Kyler Murray's a good quarterback, but now that he has a number 1 target in DeAndre Hopkins, you know, he had a big game, and I'm looking for them to actually have a decent season.
Everyone was so down on Hopkins coming into the season, and we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit. I have him as my number 1 receiver at this point. I was getting Hopkins in the second round, middle of the second round. Now, obviously, there's a caveat there, and again, we are jumping ahead of ourselves here. Michael Thomas, significant injury, is expected to be out several weeks. You know, this is from the guy that's been saying Michael Thomas, number 1 overall player in fantasy. They looked they won the game fairly convincingly, did New Orleans. Breeze didn't have over 100 yards passing until the 4th quarter. Thomas had 3 catches for 17 yards. Cook had that long one down the sidelines, and Kamara was bottled up even though he had 2 touchdowns. So on a fantasy stat sheet, he looks great. But Kamara didn't really look all that good. I mean, they're my pick to win the Super Bowl, but I guess just because of that pick 6 really turned the tide. But boy, where do you even rank Michael Thomas at this point? No idea when he's going to be back. They're saying several weeks on Thomas to be back. So, you know, when we do these rankings, I want you to kind of think like, hey, we're drafting for the rest of the season. Already listed as doubtful for week 2. And they're saying several weeks, what several weeks equates to. But how far down do you move Michael Thomas, guys?
Well, I have him in 1. I took him right away off. I'm assuming that week 4, week 5 area, just to be safe, I wouldn't play him. I mean, Green Bay's on the schedule coming up.
They have a bye week 6.
So week 7 could be a possibility. Just wait till the bye week is up.
But by that rationale, how's he still your top receiver if he's going to miss four games? I mean, we're not saying he's going to miss 4 games. And knowing Michael Thomas, maybe it's only 2-3 games. But I would take Hopkins healthy.
Well, yeah. You also have to look at Devontae Adams. I mean,
I've never been a big fan of Devontae Adams, but I moved him way up my board
to.
On wide receivers. Brian, what were your thoughts about week 1?
Mine was Aaron Rodgers. Really convinced. I mean, before the season, many people predicted him to get the MVP this year, and that's who I'm going with for MVP as well.
Well, I got to be honest with you. One of another takeaway from preseason drafting, Rodgers wasn't even going in the top 10, and some people were drafting him as a second quarterback. In fact, I was in a league where I got Stafford as my quarterback as you know, the 12th quarterback off the board. The 13th quarterback off the board was Aaron Rodgers. And obviously, in hindsight, I wish I would have probably taken Rodgers. But, you know, I think everyone was like, okay, he had a down year. He's had some injury problems. They didn't draft him anybody. He's got the only Funchess, the only receiver they brought in, opted out of the season. Is he going to be able to keep doing this?
I think the one part that's going to help him is having Aaron Jones as a receiving back. He's a great dual threat to have in the backfield with Aaron Rodgers. And again, they were utilizing a bunch of different people. It's kind of like the old Green Bay Packers when they had Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, Donald Driver at the end of his career. A lot of different people. John Kuhn was there. So, I mean, it's good to see. It's good to see the Packers doing what they're doing right now.
I have to be honest with you. One of the people that I was really high on coming into this season, Jace Sternberger. Now, not a huge game week 1, but he, in fact, didn't, had 5 yards. No, he didn't even. He had 1 target week 1. There's a guy that if you're really looking for some tight end depth or maybe a late season flyer, I think he could emerge on that offense. It really all went to Davante Adams week 1. They're not going to be able to. Davante Adams isn't going to have those numbers every week. I think Sternberger might be an interesting pickup. Parker, what thoughts did you have about week 1 other than what we talked about so far?
So besides the football, I was looking at, I think...
This is a football podcast,
I know,
so it can't be beside the football.
Well, besides talking teams, I'm going beyond the arc and saying about, I think not having preseason is really hurting players. Look at all the injuries we had week 1. And another thing that I mentioned in our last podcast, our rookies, I don't know how they're going to do. I think our rookies proved me wrong and showed up. Joe Burrow showed up, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then also we mentioned about Chase Young earlier.
I think it remains to be seen. I don't know about you, I know you guys are active on Twitter. I saw a lot on Twitter people saying, hey, look at this. Look at how well they're playing. We're not seeing sloppy football. And then, I don't know if any of you guys watch the Browns.
Yeah, I watched it.
I think they could have benefited from some more snaps. I'm interested to see how it plays out. I wonder if season over season the injuries are up because it does seem like some marquee guys went out. But I would argue that it's probably just as many injuries. In fact, not really any significant injuries. Usually week 1 is when you see a lot of significant ACL injuries. I don't recall any position skill players going down with ACL injuries early.
The only one I could think of is Jarwin.
Right, yeah. Jarwin, yes, and
Jarwin,
and he is out for this
and
season.
Also Van Der Esch breaking his collarbone, right?
Well, we're specifically going for ACL on this.
ACL.
There was someone else who had an Achilles. Oh my gosh,
Marlon Mack.
Yes, Marlon Mack. So 2 season-ending injuries. For some reason, to me, that just seemed a little bit lower than usual. But that's what I had. The big takeaways for me and from the group: the Green Bay Packers, the Washington football team, and, pretty much business as usual the rest of the way. Not a lot of upsets. I thought that was pretty interesting. All right, so we haven't been here for a month. I'd assume that our top 25 has changed fairly significantly. So I'd like to take a look at the top 5 overall, and then, like I said, we'll get to the wide receivers and running backs shortly. Tyler, I'm going to start with you. Who do you have in your top 5?
Based off of week 1, I have Christian McCaffrey at number 1, Patrick Mahomes number 2, Lamar Jackson number 3, Davante Adams at number 4, and DeAndre Hopkins at 5.
Interesting. So you have Adams over Hopkins?
I went McCaffrey, Mahomes, Jackson, DeAndre Hopkins, and then I went with Kamara.
Interesting.
I went Jackson, Mahomes, DeAndre Hopkins, McCaffrey, and Adams.
Down on McCaffrey. What about week 1? I mean, I think, to me, he's the consensus number 1. I think the next 4 backs, you could probably kind of interchange, even 5. Why are you down on McCaffrey?
He had a good game. I'm not going to knock him, but it took him a little bit to get going. The Raiders had him in check for a little bit until he finally got going, and I thought Lamar and Patrick played a little bit better. DeAndre Hopkins had a really big game in Arizona. I have to give him over McCaffrey because he went to a new team, new quarterback, and he looked really well. And Davante Adams I have him ranked below McCaffrey, but...
I mean, 23 carries, 96 yards, two scores, 3 catches for 38, 28 points. I mean, that's McCaffrey all day long. I'm surprised by that. I see where you're coming from. I wouldn't overreact to that, though, too much. I have McCaffrey. This might surprise you. Derrick Henry at number 2. And I have never been a Derrick Henry supporter, but I tell you, he just looks amazing. Even just in little like off tackle plays, he's running for 8, 9, 10 yards. And I'm interested to see some of their coaching staff has said about trying to get him more involved in the passing game. Interested to see what comes of that. Did have 3 catches, which in a PPR league, which is what we're typically talking about here, that's very helpful. Then I went to Kamara, Hilaire, and DeAndre Hopkins. So I have Hopkins as my top receiver. I do have Adams in the back half of 10 to 15. Any thoughts about some of those picks there? I noticed that you both Brian and Tyler, you're really high, top 5 for Mahomes and Jackson. Do you find that, first of all, do you have either of those two in any leagues?
I have Mahomes in one league.
Okay.
I have Mahomes in a league.
Where did you have to draft them?
I think 18 or 19 I got them.
So second round?
Yeah.
Tyler's second round?
Yeah, I have him in our league. Second. I think it was
you took him
maybe
in the
third.
second
Yeah.
round.
My only concern with having those guys so high is you're really hurting yourself at running back. Now, obviously, Mahomes, Jackson, they're the real deal. Even Kyler Murray I have in my top 20. But interestingly enough, I wonder what's the drop-off? For example, if you could have gotten an Aaron Rodgers in like the 10th or 12th, I would take McCaffrey or Derrick Henry and Rodgers over Mahomes and somebody like, Miles Sanders or Josh Jacobs or somebody like that who you get in the second. That's just my thought process. But typically your quarterbacks don't start going off the board till later than that. And I think that these two are sort of changing fantasy and showing that if you have a good quarterback, that really can make all the difference in your team.
Because Lamar Jackson, his first game, he threw over 300 yards to receivers that their number one is a second-year player. And
well, Mark Andrews, I would argue, is probably their number
Mark
one.
Andrews is their number one.
I was
option.
talking about okay,
Hollywood Brown, yeah. I would say...
Well, I think all the receivers got a share of good reception. Like Willie Snead even got some action. Willie Snead hardly catches the ball.
I'm surprised that the Ravens didn't try to upgrade
And also,
at wide receiver.
I think
over the
J.K.
offseason.
Dobbins looked really good, and so did J.K. Dobbins carried the ball real nice too.
Interesting there. I was really high on Mark Ingram. What did you think about Dobbins getting those 2 touchdowns?
Obviously, they're looking at the future. You have to look at the future when it comes to sports. I don't think J.K. Dobbins doing that was a bad option.
What if you're a Mark Ingram owner?
Well, then obviously you're SOL then.
I thought very interesting in a couple of my drafts, I was looking at where they went in relation to each other. One of my drafts, I went to get Dobbins. The guy before me got him, and then I got Ingram. So Dobbins went first, and then literally the next pick, Ingram. Most drafts, it was about that same way. But I wonder, I think Ingram's still got a lot left in the tank, and I think as much as they're going to run, and if you remember last year, who was their third string back last year? Gus Edwards.
Okay.
So Gus Edwards was on the team last year, and he was startable in some weeks, even with Ingram and Jackson. I wonder how that's going to be this year, and I'm interested to see how that's all going to work out. So remains to be seen. All right, let's go 5 to 10 here. Tyler? 6 to 10.
Number 6, I have Russell Wilson. Number 7, Derrick Henry. Number 8, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Number 9, Travis Kelce. And number 10, Josh Jacobs.
I just still think that you're too low on Helaire there. I think that Helaire... I want to see week 2. I want to see week 2 to see how much more he gets involved in the passing game. I think Russell Wilson in a top 10... He played great. He's awesome. I have him as my number 5 quarterback. I think the first round is beyond Jackson and Mahomes. I think any quarterback in the first or even the second round is probably a little too high unless it's Kyler Murray. Thoughts about Helaire being that low? I mean, you're a Chiefs fan.
Well, again, I want to see with how much they're going to stick with running the ball.
I mean, yeah, everyone was so high on Damian Williams last year. I mean...
Yeah, I think it's a bit of an adjustment because you had Damian Williams who just went completely off in the Super Bowl. And then when he opted out, it was kind of like, okay, well, I originally thought they were going to run with Williams and use Helaire as the top catching receiver. But now that that's kind of a little bit different, I'm not sure if they're going to run with him as much. I don't think he's going to get 25 carries a game. In week 2, he might going up against the Chargers, but that's what continues to be seen is how much they'll utilize him in that offense.
I think Darrell Williams will get some more carries, and I also think that they were really trying to get him that second touchdown, and he just couldn't punch it in. I hope that doesn't take away from some of those things. I hope they still give him those shots, but I think he's going to be involved in the passing game. They were also leading basically the entire game.
That was no competition.
Yeah, and Houston just Watson. I don't know if any of you noticed this. Anytime that Watson tried to break out of the pocket, he was not looking to pass. He was always looking to run and wasn't even attempting passes when he was like on bootlegs or things outside the pocket. And I'm as big of a Brandon Cooks fan as anybody. He didn't show up.
David Johnson showed up. That was really
Will
it.
Fuller had over 100 yards.
Johnson got injured.
Yeah.
He came back in the game.
If you
he
think
should be good
about
to go.
it, without, I mean, even though David Johnson's there now, it's very similar to how Arizona played last year. Very weird team, just not really interesting, kind of boring. So it's interesting to see.
Brian, 6 to 10.
I actually went Michael Thomas still at number 6. 6 him, 7 Devontae, 8 Saquon Barkley, 9 had to stay home, take my boy Zeke, and then I went Kelsey at 10.
I like Devontae Adams. I just wonder how he's not getting double covered every single play. They don't have anyone else. I mean, even Valdez-Scantling had a good game. I just wonder if Adams can maintain that. And you also wonder, last year there was such a run-heavy team. He had a huge first week. I just wonder if Adams is going to be able to keep this up over the whole season. I'm way up on him from where I was. Still higher than me there, Brian.
Cool.
Parker?
So 6, I have Josh Jacobs, followed by Julio Jones, Zeke, Travis Kelce, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
One of the people that I really wanted to talk about today was Jacobs. 3 touchdowns, had over 20 carries, had 25 carries, 93 yards, and 3 touchdowns, and had 4 catches for 46. They didn't really have anybody else coming in there. I really like Jacobs. I have him a little bit lower, definitely in my 20s, but I'm very, very impressed with Jacobs, and frankly, I don't really know who else they have. I think that Jacobs is going to be somebody that if it's going to be a little tough to trade him for him now, but if you can, make a compelling offer for Jacobs, I think that's going to pay off. I have Zeke. I guess I'm a little higher on Zeke than some. He still had a great game.
Yes, he did.
He was looking good. He caught some passes. He was really the only exciting player. Although CeeDee Lamb, I did like CeeDee Lamb in week 1.
Not Cooper? Cooper didn't really have a bad game.
It was just I think that part of the problem is now with Jarwin going out, I do think that's going to allow CeeDee Lamb and Gallup and Cooper to get more involved. But I think with Jarwin's injury, that's going to benefit Elliott a lot more on that short to intermediate passing.
Yeah,
game.
Not having Jarwin gone is really, again, Jarwin was always the backup. So, I mean, Dalton Schultz is not a bad option to have, even in a fan. I'd say he'd be a good backup to have, but I really think this could benefit Amari Cooper, and especially Amari Cooper plays really good at home. So again, some home games coming up on the schedule. We'll see what happens, but I'm liking what the receiver core can do.
Cooper 10 for 81 with 14 targets. So obviously, he didn't get in the end zone, but not too many Cowboys did.
Zeke
did score. I have Elliott, Barkley, I have Mahomes and Jackson, then I have Dalvin Cook. I'm looking highly on him. What do you make of the Vikings week 1? I was all over the Vikings D in almost all of my leagues, and they just got annihilated.
Thielen, man. Adam Thielen. I'm sure Parker was just about to say that.
Well, actually, I was going to say, look how long it took Thielen to get points because Kirk Cousins didn't have 100 yards passing until like late third quarter, early fourth.
And it's not like the Packers have a crazy good defense.
They have Jair. That's really it.
No, I mean, it's a good defense, but I was just so surprised that the Vikings, I just don't know what happened.
Yeah, it was a interesting first game for Minnesota. Great game for Green Bay. But it's interesting to see what Minnesota's going to do going forward.
And I guarantee Kirk Cousins did not like that.
Well, no. How can you like it? All right. Now, what I want to do is just, because we're coming up on our first segment concluding, what I'd like to do is go around and I'd like you to talk about 2 people from the back half of your top 25 that you are really high on and that have moved up in your list since the last time. We'll start with Tyler.
Okay, 2 guys. Well, I have Juju Smith-Schuster, who I wasn't really sure coming into the season. But watching that first game, he seems to be back on track with Ben Roethlisberger, and I'm looking for him to be his number one target again. And another one who I was fairly surprised at in the Monday night game was Noah Fant. Drew Lock seems to like throwing to him a lot, so I think he's going to be one of his big targets moving forward, and so we'll see what happens with those two.
I've got Fant inside my top 10 at 9 for tight end. I could see that going up. I love Juju. I have him at 22, and I think that you've got 3 people from Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, and Smith-Schuster that I believe legitimately could all have 800 plus yards. I don't want to say 1,000 for all 3 of them because I don't know that Claypool gets on the field enough. Deontay Johnson didn't have a huge game, but I foresee, and here was the big surprise. I'm just going to sidebar with Parker. Did Ebron even have a catch?
He did.
Because he didn't seem very involved in the least bit, and I thought that was gonna be a huge move for the Steelers.
I think from what I watched the game, I think the Steelers are mixing everything because even Benny Snell and Samuels even got their share of the load. James Washington had a decent game too. I have hopes for him, but the big surprise for him was Juju Smith-Schuster. Last season, he was injured. When he was healthy, he didn't really get the reception. I don't know if that's because Mason Rudolph is not a good backup quarterback.
1 catch for Ebron, 18 yards, 2 targets. Definitely not the start that he wanted. I was also concerned, and I don't know if you caught this, he had an offensive lineman roll up on his leg, and he got up limping pretty bad. Of course, he made it through the game. I just hope that that's not something that lingers because I have Big Ben in a couple of leagues. Brian, 2 people from 11 to 25 that are big movers for you up.
Kyler Murray again. I'm always been a big fan of him, and Josh Allen from Buffalo. Josh Allen was balling.
So 2 quarterbacks here, Brian. And this is part of the reason that I'm not necessarily ready to put Mahomes and Jackson in that top 5. And even though I do have them in the top 10, because you have people like Josh Allen. I mean, the numbers that he had were incredible.
That does include a fumble, too. Think of it that way.
Right. Well, he had 2 fumbles, 1 fumble lost. 312, 2 touchdowns, 14 carries, 57 yards, another touchdown for 28.18 fantasy points. Very, very interesting. Josh Allen. What are your thoughts in terms of what the Bills look like moving forward? Yes, they played the Jets, and then they go to Miami. After that, the Rams, the Raiders, and at Tennessee. That schedule sounds pretty easy.
I mean,
Tennessee aside,
Buffalo, it just seems like, you're a generic team. I mean, do I think they'll win their division still? Yes. Do I think that they're Super Bowl contenders? No. The defense is good. Offense, I mean, Devin Singletary, not a bad running back. John Brown, pretty decent game. Cole Beasley, a good a good slot receiver. Not a bad offense though. Zach, I know you're about to talk about him. But Zach Moss, not a bad rookie running back to have.
9 carries for 11 yards, did find the end zone. Not really what he expected. I'm curious how Stephon Diggs is going to look there.
Diggs had 17, 18 points.
8 for 86. I'm sure that he was happy with that. Why isn't this team... why doesn't this team have a shot at the Super Bowl? They've made the playoffs the past couple of years. They've definitely improved offensively. They've gotten Stephon Diggs, who's an elite wide receiver.
I think the thing is still lack of playoff experience with them.
Well, they should have beat Houston last year, and they ended up blowing that game. And I think that's one of the reasons a lot of people, don't believe in them yet until they, like as Brian said, till they actually win in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very convinced that they can be successful, but I don't think they're going to be able to right now compete with your Kansas City. We'll throw Baltimore in there, and I'm really convinced with Parker's team. I am really sold with. I think they were really a quarterback away from having a good season.
So they made a comment during Monday Night Football. They were 5th in points allowed, the Steelers, last year, and they still only went 8-8. And that shows you about the offense.
I was ready to say, that's honestly a winning season, though, for Pittsburgh, because look at how bad their offense was beat up last year. I went to the Jets and Steelers game last year, and it was a terrible game for the offense.
So, yes, back to Buffalo, though. Could be a good team. Just, again, and I need to see it before you believe it.
I want to see that first New England game, and see if Buffalo can show up and win that game. And I think if they can win that game, that's going to go a long way.
And one thing that's really going to impact Buffalo, I believe, this season is the fans not being there. that is one thing that they really have to their advantage. Same with Seattle. Same with who else? I don't know. Let's just go with Atlanta. Okay, but yeah, some of these
I
teams.
think all teams.
Yeah, it really. Even watching a Washington game.
Well, actually,
those guys were.
I got to tell you, Washington probably got lucky last week because if they were playing the Eagles, it probably would have been 75% Eagle fans. I've been there when that happens, and it's not good. Parker, 2 people from 11 to 25 that you're very high on, big movers.
Alvin Kamara, after a disappointing fantasy season last year, not the best. He actually had a really good week 1, and I'm gonna go on the limb and say Cam Newton. Not a big Cam Newton fan, but Cam Newton week 1 did pretty good.
I want to talk about Newton because here's another person, Brian, back to our original conversation, another quarterback that's definitely starter worthy that was absolutely drafted outside of the top 10 to 15 quarterbacks. I'm impressed. I don't know if I would want to roster any, frankly, outside of Julian Edelman, any other offensive player for New England. I mean,
I would look at maybe James White just to be a fill-in flats 1 week or
in
something.
a PPR league, sure. But again, like, you just don't know. I really like Cam Newton there. I'm not sure about Kamara, and I have him in a lot of leagues, and I'm very high on him, and I'm rooting for him. But Parker, 12 carries on 16 yards. Yeah, he did have a touchdown, 5 for 51. So sure, PPR, that's a great day. And because he got you the 2 touchdowns, but 12 for 16?
I was looking at more at the passing, more in with the PPR with the passing.
And Latavius Murray actually had some really nice runs, only had a few carries. He had 15 for 48. But I saw him, he had some nice runs. That troubles me that Murray had more carries than Kamara, even though obviously they're looking to Kamara around the end zone. So interesting to see how that plays out. As we conclude this segment here, there are 2 particular people that I would like to talk about. Number 1 for me, well, interestingly enough, in this particular area, the big movers for me are 2 Seattle Seahawks, Chris Carson and Tyler Lockett. Carson was someone who had, for no reason, really wasn't going high in drafts. I'm curious why Chris Carson didn't go higher. He can catch. He did have some injury issues, but Rashad Penny is hurt. They did bring in some other people at running back, but he really looked good week 1. 2 touchdowns through the air, only 6 carries, but 6 for 45 and 2. Only 12 touches. I really think his touches are going to go up. And really, again, Tyler Lockett. Yes, DK Metcalf had a really good game, but I personally think Russell Wilson can maintain 2 strong wide receivers. I really like Tyler Lockett to break out this year. Although, can you really call it a breakout? He's been pretty consistent.
Yeah,
for
Lockett's
the last
been there
years.
for a while. I mean, I have Lockett in 1 league, and I was very surprised he pulled up 17 points, 16 points, which again surprising for a guy like him.
8 for 92.
Yeah.
And again, he didn't get in the end zone. Metcalf did, and Carson got in with 2 receiving touchdowns. That's not going to happen every week. I honestly think Lockett is locked in top 10 wide receiver in 2020. All right, well, we are going to take a quick break. We are going to come back with some biggest surprises, biggest disappointments, and waiver wire pickups when we return.
This is Dylan Kleintop, and you are listening to the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide.
You can't forget it's always wasted for the hand.
Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide. We're here with the Coleman, Brian, Christiana, Parker Rose, and me, Paul Miller, and we are here for our September edition, taking a look after week 1. We'll be back with you again in October to reflect on the next 4 weeks, and we'll be here with you each and every month through January. Fantasy football, something we're all very passionate about. What we want to do this second part of the show is we're going to look at some of the biggest surprises, some of the biggest disappointments, and then end with waiver wire pickups. I don't think anybody's changing their Super Bowl picks because we're only through 1 week, but we will revisit that. It's something we do every single show, but we'll revisit that in October. Well, we're going to go the other way this time around. I'm going to start with Parker. Parker, let's talk maybe in a little depth about one specific person in your biggest surprises from week 1, maybe that we haven't mentioned so far.
In my opinion, because I'm not high on him, I'm not a fan of him. We already talked about him, but I'm going with Kyler Murray. I'm not a fan of Kyler Murray, but he had a really good week 1. I will give him that.
Well, let's start. Why are you not a fan of Kyler Murray? I mean, this is fantasy. It doesn't matter if you like him or not if they're putting up points.
I think he's more of a baseball player than a football player. And he can't see over his offensive line.
You know, his numbers didn't really look all that great if you take his rushing out of this. Yes, 13, 91, and 1. 26 of 40 for 230 and a touchdown and interception.
Okay, his completion rate's not the best.
65% is not very good.
No.
I didn't get to see that game, so I don't really have any insight. I do think, though, that I can't believe he's certainly not going to have 90 yards a game rushing. And he's I really want to see how he gets down, what kind of hits he's taking. I do think, though, that he has cemented himself as at least a top 5 fantasy quarterback, wouldn't you say, Brian?
Yeah, for sure. I don't get why people have negative vibes towards the guy.
You know, he's kind of like Lamar Jackson last year in that a lot of people said, okay, yeah, he can run the ball, but he's not a very accurate passer. Well, when you're running the ball 15 times a game and you're only passing the ball 20 times a game like Jackson was last year, you can be
think
inaccurate.
about it, they're the same player. If you want to think about it.
Jackson's a little bit bigger, and I think,
all right, taller.
I think he could sustain that type of game for a little longer. I don't think Murray is, unless he can get out of bounds. That is really going to be the big thing because that's what happens with some of these guys. They come in the league, they run a lot, and then a year or two down the line, they can't run the ball anymore because they take such a beating. And again, as their franchise cornerstone there in Arizona, I don't think they want to run the ball, but I guess if that's how they're going to win. Thoughts on Larry Fitzgerald's non-involvement really week 1?
The thing with Larry Fitzgerald, it's. Again, this is probably it. I would say so, at least. I think Larry Fitzgerald's going to do whatever he can at this point just to win. If that means he sits as a third option now behind Christian Kirk even, he's going to do that.
Can we drop him in fantasy?
Oh, bench. I don't think start. What was his week last week? I didn't even see.
He had 4 for 34. Christian Kirk, 1 catch for 0 yards on 5 targets. So Hopkins had a big week. I think we were all kind of at a consensus that he's top 1, 2 now. The hate had gone too far on Hopkins. Okay, what do we do? Christian Kirk, Larry Fitzgerald, Brian.
Who am I taking?
What do we do with either of them?
I think they're both bench options.
But what about people?
I mean, Kirk got the targets. I mean, it depends who's going. I mean, look who I was going to say. Richard Sherman was probably on DeAndre Hopkins most of the game.
Although Sherman only ever stays on one side of the field. So they might have been rotating Fitz over there or Kirk.
Yeah.
And maybe rotating Hopkins away or putting Hopkins in the slot or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on who they play.
So Brian advocates benching. Anybody feel more strongly about Kirk and Fitzgerald? Because both of these guys have to be owned in over 80% of leagues. I mean, Kirk's coming into this week, he was owned in nearly 80%. He's down to 70%. What are your thoughts, Tyler?
I think both of them take a little bit of a hit now with Hopkins being there, and I kind of agree with what Brian said. I think at this point in Fitzgerald's career, he's just going to do what he has to do. I had him last year in one of the leagues, and he just wasn't putting up the numbers that we expected at the beginning of the season. So Christian Kirk could be a different story with him still being young. I think he could kind of slot in behind Hopkins, but as far as Fitzgerald, I don't think he's going to do a whole lot.
Fitzgerald, I was way off. He's under 40% owned.
Well, I mean, again, people are, I think, expecting DeAndre Hopkins to get the ball. And Kenyon Drake, I mean, if you think about it, that team is running more than they're passing probably because Kyler runs as well. So, I mean, Kyler Murray, another person you want on your team, but maybe the bench is the best option if you want to pick up those guys.
And Drake, pedestrian first week, 16 for 60, a touchdown, 2 catches, 5 yards. Nothing special, but to get you in the end zone. Although Hopkins should have had that touchdown. He went on like the 1-inch line, and then they handed it off to Drake. So realistically, Drake's day could have been a lot worse. Hopkins' day could have been a lot better. Brian, biggest surprise from week 1 maybe that we haven't chatted about so far?
Mine was the amount of injuries. I went on a storyline, or a headline was the amount of injuries we had this past week, especially with the Eagles.
Michael Thomas injured in the game. Miles Sanders, Kenny Golladay didn't play coming into the week. That really surprised a lot of people, and I think that's one of my biggest takeaways coming into the week was how many people were scratched sort of at the last minute. I mean, it wasn't till Saturday, even first thing Sunday, that Sanders and Galladay were both rolled out.
And the other one I was going to bring up to you was the lack of penalties. I don't know if you read that, how the holding was down 75% from what it was in the last year's week 1.
So do you believe that the referees need a preseason?
I think everybody in general needs some type of preseason to get prepared.
This has been a very debated topic, that 4 preseason games was far too many, and that it was sort of like a money grab by ownership.
It is.
As a former football team season ticket holder, it is a money grab. You have to pay full price. Half the time you go, you don't see anybody, and if you're lucky enough, you see a series of people who you even know who they are. It's in the middle of the summer. They're on a weeknight. And you're paying full price for these tickets.
Exactly. Even if they would have did 2, do half of it.
I truly believe what they are going to do is go back to 2 preseason games and extend the season to 18 games.
Is this going forward?
Going forward.
All right, so next season.
It's got to happen. Here's the main reason why they're not going to get rid of the preseason. Because it's almost like the same reason, Tyler, that you're not going to go back from 162. Because if you go back from 162, there are less dates, less money, right?
Well, yeah.
So you still need 10 home dates, home and away. Meaning 20 games. So there's still going to be 20 games. There's got to be I know that they've already kind of went through the next collective bargaining agreement. There has got to be more games, or we're going to continue having 4 preseason games.
And the thing is also, as 3 of us here have studied media, you got to look at, like you said, TV deal, more primetime opportunity. This is more exposure for businesses, for commercials, advertising. I think that would be a better idea, doing 2 preseason, 18 games. That's actually a great idea.
I think they also need to expand the rosters. That's a different story.
Because it's 53, right?
Yeah. Well, they've upped the practice squad. I'm not sure I don't think the game day rosters have increased.
Speaking of practice squad, did you guys see Josh Rosen sitting in the stands at the Tampa Bay and New Orleans game?
Is he on a roster?
He's on Tampa Bay's practice squad.
Okay.
And that's honestly who I would not be surprised if he is the one to succeed Tom Brady.
Who is their backup?
Is it Blaine Gabbert?
It is Gabbert. Blaine Gabbert, the backup. Rosen's certainly not a bad third option. Tyler, let's talk about one of the surprises on your list.
Yeah, so I was watching the Cowboys and Rams game the other night. Malcolm Brown, he had 18 carries for 79 yards, 3 receptions for 31 yards, and he scored 2 touchdowns. Now, I know the Rams are a team that kind of switches their running backs in and out, but if Brown can put up production numbers like that every week, I think he's going to get the bulk of the carries.
So one of the biggest things, and I'm sure we'll get to Malcolm Brown, so I don't want to jump too far ahead in our waiver wire section. Malcolm Brown is on paper. At this point, he was about 5% owned. He's now 73% owned because waivers did run in a lot of ESPN leagues prior to us recording this. I want to warn people to not be too overzealous on Malcolm Brown. I do like Malcolm Brown. If he's out there, sure, pick him up. I would really avoid starting him. I personally believe that Akers is really going to be the guy. And we also forget about Darrell Henderson. Henderson only had 3 carries for 6 yards last week. Akers had 14 carries for 39 yards. Didn't look all that spectacular. Malcolm Brown looked good. But to your point, you're making the point here that they've got sort of this 3-headed monster. I don't believe that you're really going to be able to predict who is going to be the guy. And frankly, they drafted Cam Akers to be the guy. I think he's going to overtake him. So my advice is, yes, Malcolm Brown, if he's out there, pick him up. If you've got him, maybe you start him this week. But at Philly, their front 7's good. Maybe it's a decent start this week, but I look for the Cam Akers to have a big game.
Well, that's the thing. Brown's not a guy I think you're going to start every week, but I think he's a good, solid running back to have off the bench or maybe use as a flex option from time to time.
Is Vinny Curry playing, do you know, by any chance? Anyone hear anything, how severe that? All right. But yeah, no, I agree. And you also brought up the Rams. That's a great idea. I think Robert Woods is going to be... He's going to be solid this
People
year.
were really down on Robert Woods. I got him in a league, and I think Woods and Cup are going to do well. I think I'd be very surprised. honestly, though, the Rams, they didn't look all that great either against the Cowboys.
No, they stooped down to the Cowboys' level.
Well, okay, I had a couple of big surprises, many of which we've already talked about. Hilaire, Aaron Rodgers, Josh Jacobs, those are all people that we need to keep an eye on. I wanted to say that my biggest surprise beyond that, Mike Evans did end up playing. Also, Gronk. Frankly, Tampa Bay, that's one group that we really haven't mentioned much beside your discussion of Brady. Evans did get the touchdown, which really kind of salvaged his day, but 1 catch, 2 yards for a touchdown. Gronk, I believe he only had 1 or 2 catches, 2 for 11. Godwin had a good day. Ronald Jones looked good. Fournette didn't get a lot of run. But let's talk about Tampa Bay, because everyone was so high on that. So when we say surprises, it's sort of going to segue into disappointments. Did anybody show up at all?
Well, to say your one thing about disappointment, I wasn't disappointed in them because it's their first game together. I mean, it's a super team. You look at every sport. I mean, let's go back even to basketball. Sorry to change sport, but when LeBron James joined the Miami Heat, guess what? They weren't good their first couple months either. I mean, got to give them some time, let them get used to playing with each other. And again, this is their first competition against any other team because of no preseason.
And their first game was against Drew Brees and the Saints.
And the Saints defense looked pretty good.
Which is a favorable Super Bowl pick.
I think they play Carolina in week 2, so we'll see. If they struggle against Carolina, then there might be some issues, but I think they'll be all right.
Going on, I think this isn't going to just be. This is going to take a couple weeks.
You got Carolina at Denver, home for the Chargers, and then at Chicago. There's some.
It might not be until Chicago that this team starts looking the way that people thought they were.
I still don't see Gronk being the number 1. I think he's the number 2. O.J. Howard, he got a lot of the looks from Brady.
Yes, however, O.J. Howard is dealing with an injury issue, and that was in my tight end rankings. I actually moved Gronk up to 5 because of O.J. Howard's injury. Now, it remains to be seen. They haven't really come out with a practice report yet. You know, he looked good too.
I also feel Gronk isn't in the right shape yet to play a football game.
Yeah, I would love to see how many snaps that Gronk got. I wonder if that extends as the season goes on. Here's the problem. Let's say they start off 0-2 or 1-2, trying to conserve Gronk for the playoffs. Well, you got to make it there first, right? I mean, I'm just looking. It doesn't particularly even say, but that's going to be a rotation. I guess my question and problem is, what do we do with Tampa Bay? There's no clarity at running back. There's no clarity at wide receiver, other than, of course, you've got 2 good ones. But then you've got this third guy, Scotty Miller, who came out of nowhere.
Well, if you think about it, that was the type of guy that he had in New England. That's your Julian Edelman, your Chris Hogan. I mean, your Wes Welker.
Brian, in a deep league, is Scotty Miller worth picking up?
No, I don't think so. I mean, he's going to have your, maybe like once every 3 weeks, have a decent number.
5 for 73, got a carry, now rostered in over 12% of leagues.
Well, that's good because people are going to take the hype and go with it.
Do you think he'll just stick on the bench and then throw him as a risk if you have to with injuries?
It's possible.
Yeah.
All right, well, I talked about my biggest disappointment. I'm just going to say in general, Tampa Bay. Some other big disappointments, Tyler.
Well, outside of Steven Gostkowski missing all those field goals and the extra point, I had Keenan Allen from the Chargers, only 4 receptions for 37 yards. I think that's going to be an issue with him because how much is Tyrod Taylor going to be able to get him the ball?
That remains to be seen. Or maybe a better question, Tyler, is how long will Tyrod Taylor be giving him the ball until Justin Herbert gets in there? Did have 8 targets, though. He also just signed a pretty big contract. Kansas City this week, they're going to be behind. I'd say let's give him this week before we start getting rid of Keenan Allen here. Chiefs defense looked good, but I think they're going to be behind. I look for Keenan Allen to rebound this week.
I put the Saints offense as my disappointment.
Even when they won?
Yeah, I think honestly, Drew Brees, like you said, what? Who was the one, Parker? Were you the one that said he didn't throw over 100 yards until the 4th quarter or
Professor
something?
Miller said.
Yeah, so I mean, like, that wasn't the Saints offense we were used to seeing.
18 of 30, 160 yards, 2 touchdowns. Didn't look great. Michael
No.
Thomas looked awful. Kamara, yes, had the 2 touchdowns, saved your fantasy day.
One got taken away from him at the end of the game too.
And 12, well, he wasn't in. It was close.
Yeah.
He should have had a third. But at least for Kamara, you're saying, okay, well, they're giving him the ball around the end zone. He's going to get it going rushing-wise. But Thomas, I mean, gosh, what now? And honestly, big jumps for Emmanuel Sanders.
I'll say one guy, I said it in our previous one, Emmanuel Sanders, and I think this is going to be huge for him. He's 33 years old, if I'm correct. 31, I think 33.
Steelers should have never let him go, Parker.
I don't think Denver should ever let him go.
I agree with you.
And now looking at San Francisco, they're probably thinking, why did we let him go?
Him and Juju together would have been a great mix.
Even with all of that being said, he only had 3 catches for 15 yards, did have the touchdown. But very interesting to see what does happen in New Orleans. So there's 2 huge offenses, New Orleans and Tampa Bay, both that really didn't look very good. Parker, biggest disappointment week 1.
The Cleveland Browns offense, absolutely god awful.
You know, and again,
With all those threats, and OBJ didn't do nothing once again.
I wanted to bring this
Drop
up.
passes.
How can you be surprised with Odell Beckham Jr.'s
So
numbers?
I want to cop to this. So I'm gonna toot my own horn when my players like Hilaire do great. I'm also going to come back and say, hey, I was wrong on Beckham. I said he might be a top 10 receiver this year. Here's the thing: 3 for 22. Here's the only saving grace: 10 targets. So they're still looking for him. You got to believe Baker Mayfield's going to be better.
You heard what Baker said yesterday. He said he's just not going to force throws to Odell because Odell wants the ball.
And also another discussion I'm seeing around Baker. People want Baker Mayfield benched.
Who's their backup? I mean,
I don't even know. Let's just say Browns quarterbacks are just a dumpster fire.
I think that's fair.
When Baker Mayfield got drafted, there's some people that thought he was the next best thing, and I knew he was going to be god awful.
Why? I mean, he won the Heisman. What gave you? Just because he was going to the Browns?
Heisman don't mean nothing.
I know. Case Keenum is the backup. Could Keenum get a shot?
I would think so because there's people that want Baker Mayfield bench. If you look at his stats, he threw interceptions on his opening drive in all his starts.
Wow.
This man is awful.
I mean, interestingly enough, 21 of 39 for 189. I'm interested to see. I did think that the Browns looked good in terms of running the ball. Kareem Hunt
Yeah, I was
and
going to say
Chubb.
the 2 guys look good.
But then again, that's like a 50-50 workload. So you don't really feel confident starting either of those 2. Maybe Kareem Hunt in a PPR league.
And they also gave Kareem Hunt that extension too. So in the future, are they going to start Kareem over Nick Chubb as a full?
I think it's a 50-50 split.
I don't think this is going to surprise you. I think this is the future of the NFL is going to be dual. It's not just going to be one guy anymore. I like Tony Pollard. If you guys watch Dallas, he had a little bit more into the game than this last season. I really think that Chubb and Kareem Hunt are going to be like a dual threat most of the year. It's going to be more than last year, too.
And that's a good point you made, Brian, because the Steelers are working with that right now with Samuels and Snell, with James Conner being injured.
Well, I also did want to chime in. That was really my biggest disappointment here, James Conner, and I wanted to say Saquon Barkley because it took him literally to like 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter to even get over 0 yards.
It's not Barkley. It's his offensive line.
I was saying that offensive line is poor.
Barkley has all the talent in the world, but he just needs people to block for him.
Barkley also did have 6 catches for 60 yards, so even in a PPR league, he didn't totally kill you.
Did he hit the end zone?
No scores for Barkley. But James Conner, 6 carries for 9 yards, now injured. What do we do with James Conner? Obviously, number 1, pick up Benny Snell. But gosh, Conner, and I know that we've kind of already talked about this, so I don't want to belabor that point. But
Adios.
I don't know, and I'm curious. I think that the way Pittsburgh plays, so. It's Adam Schefter says the team is optimistic for a timely return. I would say probably not this week. I wouldn't play him. I think going forward, you can't just let him go. He's going to be involved in the offense, so we shall see. Well, guys, we have about 5 minutes left in the show, and I want everyone. We'll go around and we'll talk about our waiver wire ads. Honestly, you could certainly say week 1 is the most important time to pick up players. For a lot of people, I'm one of these people. I don't like picking up players after week 1. I usually roll into 2 weeks before I start picking up players because I'm so afraid that, for example, last year when I dropped Lamar Jackson after week 1, That's my point. Is I think sometimes we can over evaluate week one. So let's hear. So if you are in a situation, maybe somebody's hurt, you're going to move someone to the IR. You have a free spot, or something like a Le'Veon Bell or somebody like that. One of your starters is out. Where do we go, Tyler?
Well, one of the biggest guys I noticed was Naeem Hines after Marlon Mack went down. But also another guy that really stood out to me from Green Bay was Alan Lazard. He had 4 receptions for 63 yards, a touchdown, and even had a rush for 19 yards. I think he's somebody that could slot in behind Devontae Adams. I'm thinking Aaron Rodgers is going to go off for a huge season. I mean, I think he's angry after they drafted a quarterback, so I think their offense is going to have a big season, and he could be a guy to watch out for.
So Lazard's at about 30% owned. I also would pair that with Valdez-Scantling. I think that that combination, I've just never been high on Adams. I did move him way up, but you got to believe that he's going to be double teamed. I think any pass catcher not named Adams on the Packers, including Jay Sternberger that I talked about earlier, are all decent ads this week.
Mine, I actually went with a kicker. Might surprise you guys. I went with Mason Crosby from the Green Bay Packers. Again, with Aaron Rodgers playing this way, they are going to be down the field more times than not. So what will that get you? That will get you points.
Well, first of all, Cleveland cut Seibert, who did immediately get picked up by the Bengals, so not sure what they're doing there. And, of course, you talked about Gostkowski, who he was terrible. So maybe this is time early on to move on from that kicker that you had and try to find somebody decent. That's an interesting strategy, Brian. Thoughts of picking somebody up, Parker?
Benny Snell. Benny Snell proved himself that he carried a lot of offense. I watched him in college from Kentucky, and he torched Penn State in that one bowl game really bad. But he showed himself that he wanted the ball and wanted the workload.
Even Benny Snell, even after waivers, is still only rostered in 41% of leagues. I'm not sure what else people need to see. I think even if Connor comes back, I think this is the 1 and A and B situation, sort of like in Cleveland, where, maybe James Conner is the Nick Chubb, Benny Snell is the Kareem Hunt. I really think this is something that's going to last.
The Steelers' depth chart is technically Jalen Samuels is the number 2. But Benny Snell got more of the carries after Connor went out because he was running real good.
Yeah, I think that Benny Snell has, without question, kind of overtaken Jalen Samuels there.
And if you want to, take a risk on Frank Gore because he's probably going to start since Le'Veon Bell's out.
Before we move off of Samuels only had 1 carry and 1 catch. And I really didn't even see him out there.
He is good in the passing game. I will give him that.
Frank Gore only owned in 2.6% of leagues. I was very, very surprised by Frank Gore's ownership, especially because he was the clear back behind Bell. I guess my thoughts on the Jets are I'm avoiding every single player on the Jets.
There is one player I will consider taking from the Jets. I will consider Jamison Crowder.
Sure, in a PPR league, I do think that you could do worse than Crowder. And actually, in a lot of drafts, he wasn't going where he was originally, where his overall draft rank was. In fact, I was in a league where he went 4 rounds after he was his projected pick. And again, 13 targets last week, 7 catches for 115, and a trip to the end zone. Next week, San Francisco at Indy, home for Denver, and in Arizona.
Richard Sherman was just announced to be out for the next 3 weeks.
Wow. So I've got 2 for you. Traquan Smith. Obviously, we talked about Michael Thomas going to be out for a few weeks. I think Traquan Smith's going to step right in. The Saints can't be this bad next week. I think Traquan Smith's a great play if you're doing daily fantasy for the next couple of weeks. I think you get him pretty cheap. And here's another one for you guys. Do you know Gardner Minshew is only owned in 15% of leagues? He looked great. He's got a great wide receiving core. Maybe if you only went 1 quarterback, or maybe if you went, maybe you're disappointed in some of the people who you drafted. You could do worse than starting Minshew. And again, he's only owned in 15% of leagues. We will catch back up with you next time with our Super Bowl picks. We will be back with you in October for the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide. I wanted to thank Tyler Coleman, Brian Christiana, and Parker Rose for everything that you do here at the school, and we all wish you the best of luck. So, Tyler, go Chiefs, go Braves.
Yeah, we're only got 2 weeks left in the baseball season, so I'm looking forward to the playoffs. But it's always great being here with you guys. I'm looking forward to doing the next show.
Absolutely. Brian, thank you. And
Yeah.
I guess better luck to the Cowboys next time.
Oh, we'll get there.
And Parker, keep rolling with the Steelers.
Big Ben's healthy and looks like old self again, so we'll wait and see.
And last but not least, my Washington football team will continue to win, and I predict they go 16-0 and have a berth in the Super Bowl. So we'll see you next time for the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide. This is Tyler Coleman, Brian Christiana, and Parker Rose. This is Paul Miller, and we'll see you again.